Our first guest is Dr. J. Robert Defulgo. Dr. Defulgo was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. After graduating from Ridley High School, he served in the United States Navy for 3 years, which included 2 tours of duty in Da Nang, Vietnam. He received an Associate of Art in Arts degree from Delaware County Community College in 1971, his Bachelor of Arts degree from California State University, Long Beach in 1972, and a degree in Applied Science with a major in Interior Design from Northern Virginia Community College in 1993. In 1976, he was offered a teaching contract with Fairfax County Public Schools, Virginia, where he taught government and American history until his retirement in 2006. He received his Master of Arts in Education from Virginia Polytechnic and State University in 1993, and a Doctorate of Arts in Community College Education from George Mason University, Virginia in 2005. His interests include gardening, interior design, architecture, music, the arts, and world travel. He resides in Virginia and spends part of his time in Europe. And of course, the reason we have Dr. Well, I'm going to call him Dr. J. I think he'll be okay with that, is to talk about his interest in Titanic. His new book is called Titanic's Resurrected Secret. And we're going to be talking quite a bit about the great ship. So without any further delay, let's get him on the line. Dr. J, if we can call you that, how are you doing tonight? And welcome to Fringe Radio.
Well, I'm happy to be there, and I'm privileged to have me on the air. You can call me what the kids used to call me, Dr. D.
Dr. D. Well, that sounds good. Did I pronounce your last name
correctly?
You
said it correctly, Dr. Yeah, it's Defulgo. Yeah.
Defulgo, okay.
Defulgo. But J. Robert, you can call me Dr. D or J. Robert's fine.
Sounds great. Anyway, I hope that you're in a part of the country that's not in the deep freeze as most of it is, but we're starting to slowly come out of it.
Well, we got out of it today. Matter of fact, it's going to be 50-something tomorrow, so it was in the 40s today.
So spring is on the way, without a doubt. It's been watching the weather here. We didn't have a winter per se. We had a little bit of snow back around Christmas, and it pretty much stayed in the 40s all through January and February. Next week we're going to be hitting 70. A little bit of a snowstorm the other day, but as much as we got, it was gone in a day or two. So it's good to see that spring is coming again. It's an honor to have you here, Dr. D.
It's a privilege, as I said, to be here to talk about my novel.
I want to talk about your novel, and I definitely want to talk about, I would say, the famous shipwreck of them all. 100 years, Titanic is still on everybody's mind. Kids are learning about it a little bit more, and there's so much interest around it. But why don't you I gave your bio, but why don't you give our listeners a little bit of a backstory on you and your writing and stuff like that, and then we'll talk about the book and Titanic.
Sure. I have always, wanted to write as a young person, but with work and job and time, you never really have the time. But fortunately, after I retired, I began writing. I finished my first novel, which is called The Invisible Moon. That's a historical novel dealing with the Vietnam War. And I had finished that up and worked on that. And then I was about to start another book called Earth's Final Sun and Moon. And I was detracted from it, or I said jumped track on that because of an incident that happened that caused me to write this book.
Interesting. Have you had an interest in Titanic for a long time?
Oh, I think since I was a kid, my mom told me that one night, this great liner hit an iceberg and sunk. And ever since then, I was sort of fascinated. But I think probably the thing that really pulled it all together was a novel, A Night to Remember by Walter Lord. I think that did it for me. I read that when I was in, I think, 7th grade, and then I got to see the movie A Night to Remember, which is like the gospel.
Right.
If you're a Titanic person, because they really got the information and about the ship and everything, that all the details and the times and everything. Wonderful book. And I had seen the movie, and that was a clincher. And ever since then, I've been hooked on the story like so many other people. I think major events like Vesuvius and the San Francisco earthquake, people gravitate to these unfortunate incidences. I guess because we figure we're the onlookers and not the victims.
Right, right. Well, and it is such an interesting topic that I mean, of course, in 1986, when Bob Ballard found the ship, I think it was such a mystery up to that point. I remember a movie that was made back in the early '80s called "Raise the Titanic."
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
one.
kind of a campy movie, but of course, I think when people saw that, and they thought, well, maybe there was hope that this great ocean liner was on the floor of the ocean in one piece, and there always has been talk about raising the ship, although they never found it. And so many researchers that went through so much to try to find the thing, and then in '86 when Ballard found it, and of course the ship is in no condition to be raised, but still a good piece of it lets you know that that it is what it is. It's not quite a bit of it's destroyed and mangled, but the front, what I would say, front half or 2/3 are still recognizable.
Yeah, yeah, because of the how that part of the ship, of course, was taking in the water. The water was just filling up the ship rather than that pressure on the other part as when it went down.
Right,
It was
right.
equalized pressure. I guess that's what kept it in that shape that it's in. But it's fascinating. It fascinated me as well because I remember I always said I always toyed with the idea of writing a story about the Titanic because originally I was thinking about some story about resurrection of the RMS Titanic, and I had a tale that I was going to tell about that, but I sort of went in another direction when I got older.
Well, it again, like I said, it just captivates, and it's interesting. We've got to take a break here in about a minute for our other stations to align with us real quick.
Okay.
But there's been a lot of, and I've got a lot of notes written down, and we'll talk about some of the things that you'd like to cover, and of course the book. But a lot of this, the speculation keeps coming up on so many different subjects. Is that did it have to happen?
Good question.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, James Cameron, all the money and time he invested in these History Channel programs where they reconstructed things, and then of course his movie, which was groundbreaking without a doubt. It almost make you feel like you were there. But so many things, and I'd like to get your thoughts too on many years before Titanic, before the keel was even laid, about a book called, I believe it was called The Titan, which was about a ship that hit an iceberg. I don't know if it was coincidental or we'll get your thoughts on that too. So we'll definitely have a lot to cover tonight, and people are more than willing to, if you want to call in and talk. Again, it's such an interesting subject. We're going to take a quick commercial break here in just a couple of seconds. Our guest tonight is Dr. Robert Defulgo. His book's called Titanic's Resurrected Secret -HEW. We're going to find out about the book, and you can go to his website at www.drjrobertdefulgo. That's DIFULGO.com, and check out his site and his other books. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight for the first 2 hours is Dr. J. Robert Defulgo. Again, Dr. D, thank you so much for giving us time and some time in your weekend here to talk about this stuff.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So if we could, let's kind of go back and forth. We can compare notes. Your thoughts, as I mentioned, and we want to get into your book and what the book is about. But what are your thoughts about many years, again, before Titanic was ever built or even conceived at that point? There was a book called, I believe it was called The Titan, and It was about a ship that struck an iceberg and sunk. Of course, there's some people that try to put the little fringy twist on it. It was the thing of things to come. Do you think it was coincidental? Did you get an opportunity to read the book, I should say, first, and your thoughts?
I did read the book, and it's peculiar that that incident that he wrote about this and this actually happens. But that expression that truth is stranger than fiction.
Yes. And
I think that's one of these things. It's just one of those turn of events where you have this kind of prediction. And then it happens to to come too, true, eventually.
Right. Well, and I think that just like anything in its day, I mean, today compared to the ships of today, Titanic was a pretty small ship. But just as we explore space, there was the early was it the Gemini accident where the capsule caught fire, of course the Challenger accident where lives were lost, not on the same scale as Titanic, but I think it's just the changes that were made back then after Titanic sank, as far as having enough lifeboats and safety equipment, that carries through to 2015. That really changed everything. Ships even prior to Titanic, a lot of them carried one or two lifeboats. That was it. And of course, that whole call it arrogant, call it whatever you want, a ship that's unsinkable, it changed the history of maritime law.
Well, I think it's a lot like today, where our technology is moving so fast that the laws can't keep up with them. And I think they were going through the same thing. The technology was moving so quickly that the rules and regulations and were for older ships. They had a whole different criteria that they used.
Right.
For lifeboats and all of that. And I think that there's a similarity where, we're having this problem with technologies moving so quickly, the laws can't keep up with them.
Right.
Like the bullying thing, to give you an example, that kind of thing.
Sure. And I think it's sad to see, but that's just history. It takes major events to happen before things change. Just a little side note, with all of the shootings that are taking place right now, with the things that like Ferguson and here in Salt Lake City, we have a lot of issues here in our city. Now all the police departments are going to the body cams. They
Right.
have to be turned on all the time. And again, it's these events, horrific in nature, that change the course of things, and I think probably for the better at the end of the day. But we've just it's part of learning and growing, sadly.
I agree with you, and I think that was part of the problem too. As you say, the technology was moving so rapidly, because you'll see that in what 2 years later when the Great War begins, that
Right.
the technology to kill was so good, and they were using strategies from the 19th century to fight that war. So you had that same kind of thing. Technology moved too quick, and the rules and regulations of what they were using they were pulling from old resources for the modern technology to deal with.
Exactly. One of our listeners writes in, just because we got so many questions sent in. It says, could you ask the doctor what are his thoughts about this new Titanic II replica ship that looks like it's to quite a phrase, it's getting a little bit of steam all of a sudden. I've tried to do a little bit of research on it myself. Some things appear like it's just in the design phase, but I've seen some other articles that say there's a company over in China that's already the hull is already constructed. What are your thoughts on, per our listener, what are your thoughts on that? Carl writes in and asks you that question.
I read, I'm a member of Titanic Historical Society, and they had done an article dealing with that ship as well, the construction of the ship. And it appears that they are on their way. I know it's somewhat multimillionaire from Australia and China or whatever. They're going to build it. But I heard about this, and it was quite fascinating what I've read. I read something about when you come on board, you get luggage, and you have to dress in the attire of the
Right.
period, which I thought was fascinating when I read that. But yeah, I hear it's supposed to be something, and they already have are booked. I don't know. I think the maiden voyage is sold out. But.
Right. Yeah, and my understanding too is that it's going to take the exactly the same route, and I think it's a billionaire from Australia that's
Right.
a mining mogul. And you're right, and I believe for the majority of the cruise, or at least initially, people are going to they're gonna have to wear the same attire that was worn back then. And I've seen some photos. Again, it's with the internet, as marvelous as it is, there's a lot of hoaxers out there. But I've seen some photos on some different sites that appear to be real. Like this thing is really being constructed and is moving along quite fast.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Well, as I said, when the organization met up with the gentleman who's building the ship, I don't recall because it's been a few years since I remember the article. But if you go to a back issue and look that up, they'll give you probably a little bit more detail. That's the Titanic Historical Association. They have done it. They did an article about the construction of the ship and all.
Right. And it's supposed to be even though the ship is going to look similar, I guess below the waterline, it's going to have the bulb out front and bow thrusters and the correct size rudder, and it's going to be below the waterline. It's going to be something totally different. But I know that the lifeboats, I think they use, like in a lot of those ships, they have those lifeboats like in the modern cruise ships where they can even roll over. But from some of the pictures I saw, it looks like these decks, if you will, open up and they're hidden in there. I think the ship has to be a deck taller to conceal them. But the initial drawings, it's pretty spot on.
Yeah, very close. I guess they want to keep it as close as they can, but have, of course, all those safety features. Matter of fact, can I give you a little footnote about something? I was watching a travel show, and Rudy Max had gone on the. I guess it was the Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth, one of the new ships, and he was talking about the diesel, and he said, that they run on diesel, and he said years ago when they ran on coal, the ship did well when it left, but as they used the coal up, the ship was hollow, and of course that was the weight that caused the ship to be stabilized. What they do now, he explained on there, is as they use the fuel is filled with ocean water. Those compartments that once had the fuel to run the ship, it's the oil now, I guess they use. But I thought that was interesting that they just refill it, so you don't have that movement.
It is well, and again, some of the things that I've read, you hear so many different. Again, I'm kind of a Titanic nut. I can't seem to get enough of it. But there are so many stories, like, of course, the everybody feels that it was the ship hit an iceberg, but yet there's a couple people that have come forward. Now, again, are they crackpots? Are they people just trying to grab a little bit of limelight? But I've also heard some stories that the ship never hit an iceberg, that they had a couple of major coal fires that were burning out of control, and that was part of the problem, is the coal fires were up against the outer hull, and the ship started to come up. Some of the riveting actually started to let go, and it was starting to flex. Who knows, But there's so many different things. But I guess coal fires were very common in those ships back in those days.
Yeah, that I know they've documented that as a coal fire. Whether that was a reason for one of the many reasons for it sinking. They also say the flaws in the metal was another reason that it wasn't pure.
Right.
The metal the steel that they used that have that, and then of course there's another one about the weather.
Okay, that one I haven't heard.
This was one I just saw recently. They said how weather had sunk the ship, that because of a warmer year that they had, the icebergs went further south than they normally do.
Okay.
Which would have put it in the path of the ship. But that was very, very interesting. It's the weather station did it. Matter of fact, it's the weather station, how weather affects history. Mm-hmm. If you can get that one, that talks about how weather affected the iceberg, the
ice
glaciers.
Flow. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and those I know that those icebergs, of course, on just a starlit night, just appear to be I've actually a friend of mine took an Alaskan cruise and said that now not of the size that Titanic hit, but was able to be on deck at night in a moonless night just with starlight, and he said they just look like black holes. You can't. I mean, until you're upon it, you don't even know it's there.
Right, and all that, that it was still, and they even said that may have been, the ocean had caused it to be even darker because the water had hit the iceberg in some capacity. I'm not sure how that works, but would make it darker as well till they were on top of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your book a little bit. We've got plenty of notes, but and I want to cover what you'd like to cover, but I'd like to hear about your book. I find this fascinating and want to kind of hear there's got to be something behind this a little bit, Dr. D.
Well, originally, if I can backtrack a little bit, sort of give it the history of this, I was on a cruise. I did a cruise to the New England cruise, which started out of Boston and ended up in Halifax. And that's why I had gone, because Halifax is where bodies that were recovered were buried. So there's a big cemetery up to, matter of fact, there's 3 of them up there in Halifax, where they have the people that they retrieved. And basically, this is the little blurb that I says, after the loss of the great liner, attempts were made to recover, identify, and lay to rest those individuals scattered on the cold North Atlantic in hopes to bring dignity to those lost souls. And, of course, what they did is for months they were sending out ships, several cable ships, to go and pick these bodies up and bring them back, because they were picking them up from April on through the summer, so they would see bodies in the ocean. Yes. So I got my idea was that this is usually not the told story. It's usually the story is the ship sinks and that's the end.
Right.
But there's a whole nother story after that, and that's the retrieving. John Jacob Astor was found. He was identified and sent home.
Interesting.
They found his body and were able to identify him. Of course, he's buried in New York. Matter of fact, his home is where Chelsea Clinton was married. That was his home.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there's a connection. I just figured I'd throw that in.
Just real quick now, did these bodies, did they stay, I mean, did they find their way into the shipping lanes, or did they kind of stay in a general vicinity?
Well, whatever the current was taking them is where they found them.
And I would assume with those cold temperatures, in the Pacific, you would have animals that would find them, but I would assume in those cold temperatures, probably not much bothered them.
No, I would think not. They didn't, as I said, that when you go to Halifax, that's where you get the story, because the ships, they were out of Halifax, the cable ships that were used to pick up the bodies. A lot were buried at sea, a lot were brought home. If they could identify them, or if there's something, they would take them home. But if they were too badly mutilated or whatever, they would have burials out at sea. And so that, when I went to Halifax and I saw that, it sort of triggered my thought process. But it wasn't until I went to Harvard. We had gone to Boston, and we went to Boston to see the regular tour, and I wanted to get to Harvard because Mrs. Widener, who this is her son, H.E.W's, Harry Elkins Widener, that's who that is. Mm-hmm. Her son was a student there, and when he died, he was a bibliophile, and what she did is she built the library that's at Harvard for him. So when you go up there, it says the Harry Elkins Widener Memorial. When you walk in, it says plaque about him going down on the ship. Well, he had gone there to go and buy books. He was a book collector, and that's what he had gone to buy. So when I got to the library and I saw his picture and everything, that's when it all began.
Wow.
As I said, it was strange. I looked at his picture, and he's holding a book in his hand, and I thought to myself, I wonder. And that was what the second part of this, it says, this post-Titanic story is about an individual whose identity was forfeited because of a theft of an extremely valuable item which he had in his possession. And he wouldn't part with it. And there's stories that I went to where he actually even bought the book. And they brought out their ledger. This was a thrill to me. They brought the ledger out, and it says he had purchased a book called Francis Bacon's Essays.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Our guest tonight is Dr. J. Robert Defulgo. Dr. D, before we go on, we've got a caller on hold that had a couple questions. Can we go ahead and just get those posted to you real quick? Okay, hold on a second. Harv, good evening. Welcome to Fringe Radio. You're on with Dr. D.
Hey, pal. Hey, Dr. D.
Yes.
I just telling, this will sound morbid, but who paid for the search and burials?
And the White Star. The White Star Line Company.
Oh, they did. Well, let me ask you this. How did they deep six the ones out in the ocean? Just layered them down or what? I know that sounds crappy.
No, it's good. Matter of fact, it's in the book. It tells how
they
did
deep
it.
six them. I haven't heard that forever.
There were metal. They had metal bars, and it's as I said, it's in the book. I explained it in the book how it was done.
Really?
Yeah, it's in the book. Some of them were buried out, let's say, with metal rods and things. It's all explained because they explained it to us in Halifax. When I went to Halifax, that's where I got the information from.
That's what that cruise was about.
Well, the cruise, the ship,
Boston to...
right. It was a Princess cruise that I took to all these places, and Halifax was one of the stops. And I
so it was a working vacation.
It was, it was supposed to be a vacation, and it ended up being a working one. You're right. So I went there, and they did a tour of the city, and that was my main reason to go up there because they have a museum with all the debris that they had collected.
And then that opened up so many other questions. Okay, yeah. Wow. You know, when you mentioned the ballast, I had never given that thought about once you use up the coal. Of course, the ballast chains on the ship. I didn't know that when they do that today, that they refill. That's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I saw that about the Queen Elizabeth or Queen Victoria, whichever ship he was taking. You know, there's travel stories. He did a whole show on ships. The whole show was all about shipping, and it even mentions that. That's what he was talking about. That's how I found out a few days ago. I just happened to be watching Rudy Max on PBS.
Who maintains the cemetery today, Dr. D? Who takes care? Is White Star or what's left of White Star or Kennard or whoever owns them? Who takes care of that today?
Well, that's still taken care of by the local. There's three of them. There's a Protestant and there's a Jewish cemetery, and they're all taken care of by the local cemetery. The people who run the cemeteries and maintain them. Okay. They don't. But when it's something to see where they're buried, because it's almost like a bow of a ship, the way they're buried, or the tombstones and all. That's why you look on the picture. That's an actual tombstone of one of them. That was the one that caught my eye for a variety of reasons, and that's why the number 223 is on there, because it is an unidentified person. They don't know who it is. They think it was the sailor. They tell you who they could identify and who they couldn't. So if the parents couldn't afford to get them, they buried them there.
Were there, and Harv, I bet you're going to ask this question, were there stowaways on Titanic?
There may have been. I can't answer that. There may have been.
Well, I would have asked that if you hadn't done it first.
I know. I read your mind.
I'm the one that would have stowed away, I'm sure.
Hopefully you would have gotten off okay.
Just like Jack did in the movie. Hey, Harv, thanks for calling in tonight.
Hey, I took a river trip one time on the salmon for a week, and two of the boats were self-bailers. In other words, they had holes in the bottom where the water comes down through the inflated ribs and then just leaks out, and that's why the ballast thing got me interested, because a self-bailer sits higher in the water, and it's easier to flip. Mm. Anyway, that's just neither here nor there.
No, that's cool.
Hey, thanks for your time, you guys.
Thank you.
Take care, pal. Bye-bye.
Take care now.
Yeah, that's, we don't, like you said, well, as Harv said, a little bit morbid, but It is true. I mean, there were obviously there were a lot of. I didn't realize, and again, I'm always learning something. I didn't realize that there were bodies floating out there for such a long time. I kind of figured that. Didn't Carpathia return to the site pretty quickly a second time?
Well, they may have. I don't know, but they were these. There's 3 ships that had gone out, the Mackie Bennett and the Minia and several other, to go. But other ships were finding bodies as well.
Gotcha.
So yeah, and then I thought to myself after I'd gone there. And that's when I thought, oh, this story is not told. This is the post. That's why I call it the post-Titanic story.
Well, let's go back to the book. I didn't mean to shuffle the other way. Sorry.
I was saying that when I was doing the research on Harry Widener and his purchasing, they had taken out the ledger of the day he purchased the book to pick it up, and it has a little notation, and they made a copy of it for me. And it says Harry Elkins Widener. It says Francis Bacon, and they've written on the side. It says Lost on Titanic. Because the book, they believe, of course, went with him in the deep blue sea. But my thought was, I wonder if they found, because it would have been a good way to identify, and that's what gave me the idea for the novel. So that's the fictional part of it, because he was never, as far as I know, was never found.
Right. Just you found the real part. You found that through the paperwork and what have you, this person did exist.
Oh, he's real. Yeah, he was definitely real. I like I said, that's why it's historical as far as Harry Elkins Widener did exist. He did go and purchase the book in London. With his collection, because he was working out of Rosenbach Museum, which is in Philadelphia. He worked very close with that book dealers in Philadelphia, so there's a connection there too with Titanic and because he was the book collector in Philadelphia that he went to, and he sort of took him under his wing, and he started to buy all these books for him, all these. And I was fortunate because the second time I went back to Harvard, they allowed me to see his books, and they took some of his books out from Harry's books to see, because I needed it for the novel to describe and talk about his books and whatever. And they had a Bacon of that he would have had, and they took it out for me to see, and it was something to go through all this. And then I sort of put it all into the novel that way, right, which worked pretty good. And as you say, they're stranger than fiction, because I'll leave you with later at the end. Maybe I could just leave you with a little hook that I have in the novel about the famous 223 number.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, again, I think and that's with your type of writing to take the facts, and of course you put a little bit of fiction, a little bit of sensationalism. Just like a lot of people said when Cameron made the movie. Why did he need to put Jack and all these other people in there? Well, it would have been a pretty boring movie without him. You've got to put the story there, even like they did in A Night to Remember. There has to be some character plot to it. Yeah,
of course, Walter Lord depended a lot on the actual people that were there, for his storyline, because it's a little different than. That's more factual, more information. As this is entertaining, but giving you the information and trying to entertain you.
Sure.
Well, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, all the great writers do it all the time. Right. Gone with the Wind and whatever. Dr. Zhivago. It's historical. That they use the history as the background, and then they create these characters to put them within that time period. That's sort of what I did, because it's today, it's then, and then it is a portion of Harry's story, which right. you have to have
exactly
to tell the story about it. But it's funny because a lot of things that happened. They had give you an example. Shall I give you an example then?
Well, you want to take a quick call?
Sure.
We've got another caller lined up for you, and then we'll go back to it. Caller, good evening. You're on with Dr. D.
Yeah. One thing I find about the Titanic that has really, really aggravated me. I studied the Titanic when I was a little kid in the 70s, and one of the things that really, really aggravates me, this whole disaster would have been avoided for one fact if the radio operator in the California would have stayed up that night. I think that they would have had a 90% save rate.
Oh, well, it's definite. Everybody will agree with you because it was only 12 miles away.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's just so aggravating. It's one of the most aggravating things I've ever contemplated in my life.
But that's like one of many crimes that happen with this. Racing at night. They don't have binoculars. There's a lot of things.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of things that played into it.
That make this disaster. It's all the research that I did, it's total negligence. Negligence.
But see, the thing is that all the wrong things lined up in a row that made it what it was.
Right, you get it all, the formula right, the fire starts.
Yeah.
Did they ever press charges for the crew of the California? Were charges ever pressed?
Well, no. The captain got a pretty. Yeah, he went through the ringer on that. Matter of fact, if you do a little research, the Titanic Historical Association did a whole article on the California, a back issue, and they describe all the details to that. How that worked. But yeah, we're in agreement. I mean, too, it's every problem that could make this disaster was in play, was totally in play. We won't. That Sunday morning they skipped the lifeboat drill. It was too windy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like if the radio operator would have received an SOS. And looked over there and saw him, and got over there, and immediately started getting people off. I think they would have saved at least 90% of them.
You're perfectly correct. You're perfectly correct. Well, even Walter Lord says when it was beeping around and he put it to his ears, but he couldn't read Morse code, so he didn't. He did put it back, turned it off, and here he's sending the CQD. He's sending the CQD to them.
Well,
didn't they
even see the rockets and figured it was Titanic?
Well, if you see that, they keep coming up with the same story. Well, a lot of company ships celebrate. A lot of Right. It was a lot of negligence, and I agree. Sure, they could have been. Yeah, it could have been.
It's just that's what makes it so aggravating. Is it's like. If they could have gotten over there, it's just that one. If the radio operator went to bed, and they would have gotten that thing over there, I mean, it wasn't in the history books.
It's the same thing. Pearl Harbor. They saw the planes coming. They thought it was bombers, and they were coming, expecting them. It's that same thing. Everything has to be in play at the right time, at the right place. The radar, they picked up all the Japanese coming, but they said, "Oh, that's the bombers. They're supposed to be coming in now."
Right.
So it's all of these things. Fate plays that card. It's trump card, as I call it.
And
I agree with you.
Another thing that I find interesting about the tales of the Titanic is. The people that were in the forward part of the ship where the main gash was, it was those people that were down there that did all the heavy work of throwing the coal in. I can't remember what they called them, the stokers or the
right.
Yeah, and they said that they would work so hard. Those guys, it was unbelievable. They'd work so hard that when they hit the sack, they were like dead. They were just.
Oh, they stayed on until the very end to keep the lights on. Yeah,
Well,
between the electricians and them, I mean, they're the ones that kept those lights on to the very, very end. And they knew they were sacrificing their lives. I mean, they're real heroes.
Yeah. There was a group, I don't know which shift it was, but had just gotten off, and they were in their beds, and they were in that dead sleep. And somebody came in and said, get up, and they threw a shoe at him, and then he closed the door, and I assume they perished.
Well, you know, nobody, a lot of things, the realization that was going to happen was inconceivable. And, you know, today I could never relate to that. You know, well, yeah, it can happen. I could never understand why they couldn't accept the fact that this horrid thing could happen, even after it happened, until 9/11. Then it clicked, and I said to myself, now I understand. I could never believe what had happened that day. I couldn't believe it for months after that. And now I experienced the same thing that they did.
Yeah. Same kind of horror.
Hey, we got to take a news break real quick, but hey, thank you for calling in tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a name of that group I think he was referring to. Matter of fact, there was a mini-series about, I think it was called of Steel and Iron or Steel and Coal or something.
Right.
I can't. They've got a specific name, and they were basically the people that were put on the ship to take care of all the. They were part of the engineering team and the building team that were made to that were put on board to handle anything if there were problems on the ship.